Hello again, it's me, Io, and I just wanted to say a few words before we get into the show proper. In celebration of changing the name of my podcast to the Built Environment Marketing Show, I'm going live to record 5 episodes on LinkedIn to kick off the season. There's going to be questions on the floor and everything, which is a nice addition to the actual interviews themselves too. And now, let's get on with the show, which is an interview with Emma Drake. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to the Built Environment Marketing Show live here on LinkedIn. And it's day 4 of me celebrating the name change of my podcast, as you do. I'm your host, Io Abbas, and I am founder and director of Abbas Marketing. And if you're joining us live, I'm always going to ask you an icebreaker question. Today's one is, tell us what's the last podcast you listened to? And if you could just write it in the comments, it just tells me that actually we're live and people can hear us. But also I find it quite interesting. So I'll start first. Actually, just before this, I was listening to a podcast with Clement Telford interviewing Dr. Alex about mental health and kids, which was really interesting because he's got a new book out and he's doing a huge campaign to raise £200 million to set up some mental health centres across the country, which is really good. So that's the podcast I was listening to. What's the last one you listened to, Emma?
Oh, gosh, I think it was Propel Swimming. And it was about parents of swimmers.
So she's a parent and she's a swimmer.
You learned quite a lot there, didn't you?
Exactly, this is what we listened to. That's what I was asking. I thought that's actually a really good question. So yeah, if anyone's live and listening, I'd love to know what podcast was the last one you listened to. And if it's mine, bonus points. Emma, do you want to give a brief intro to you in a second? Because I forgot to say, today we are talking about podcasting, a route to grow your business. And of course, my guest is Emma Drake, who is a fellow podcaster, just like me. Emma, do you want to do a brief intro? I'm saying brief intro to you and what you do.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in live today. And hello to everyone listening out there. I'm Emma. I'm a built environment communication consultant and also host of the podcast Communication Strategy That Works. I've been podcasting for nearly 2 years now, and I've learned a lot. And I'm really looking forward to chatting more about podcasting today. I probably could talk about it for more than half an hour, but I was going to keep me in check. So
yeah, I've already had this conversation. So does podcasting work to grow your business is our first question, Emma. Go.
Well, thanks for inviting me on, Io. I'm really happy to be here. And today we're talking really about, we talked about this a bit beforehand, but external audio podcasts for your business that could help you grow your business. And yes, in that context, they are an excellent way to help you grow your business. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I'm sure you'll chip in as well, Io, but there's a slice of the pie for everyone, actually. And we'll deep dive on some of these, but podcasts are so niche. You can develop audio on a product, a design, a concept, a way of doing something. You can gather opinions, you can challenge perceptions, you can produce one on any topic, really. So they're a great way of engaging people in whatever it is that you do. And because of the hosting platforms, the way they work, content is pushed to people, to huge search engines, in fact. So, when else would your content feature on iTunes or
Yeah, and that's always quite nice to see. Or I always find if I show my son, look, that's good. When he's looking at the iPad, and I'm like, oh, did you see who that was? And he goes, Mr. Tumble. No, it was me. Thank you. I was just like, it's not Mr. Tumble. That was me. I saw myself on the iPad.
Sometimes mine comes on in the car, because it's on there on Spotify. And they're like, it really freaks them out, actually. I'm not cool by any stretch of the imagination in their eyes. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I mean, they are such a great way. I think from a sort of, it's rooted in more than that, though. I think there are some stats that back that up. Podcasts listens are up, aren't they? We know this. Yeah. They sort of plateaued a bit 2020, and I think people thought, oh, was this the end of podcasting? But actually, they're predicted to grow by another 10 million up to 2026. And they're more popular with young people. I think it was the Literary Trust did a study of 11 to 18-year-olds, and as well as helping them engage better, they can do other tasks while they're listening. So they can do their homework, they can listen to podcasts, and it makes them feel, in some cases, made them feel less anxious and sad about doing things just by having someone to tune into. So I think that's a really interesting stat, depending on who your audience is. But like I said, you can carve out a real niche, can't you? And unlike blogs, where you have to know where they are, you have to go and find them, you have to do a lot of promotion and rely on the links being found. People are actively looking for podcasts, and there's huge platforms waiting to help you.
Yeah, and I think, like you said about websites and blogs, I think there's also that thing of there is a lot more opportunity to still make your mark. And I think blogs and websites, there's literally hundreds of millions of them, aren't there? And it's just, they're kind of saturated markets in a way. And this isn't it's not a saturated channel at all. I think it's something like, it's a 2 million active podcasts on Apple, for example. That's not a huge amount. It's like, it's 2 million podcasts on Apple, of which 750,000 are actually active. So active means they're still releasing episodes. And you think that's not a huge amount. So the opportunities are there for you to carve your own area. And 100 people listening to your podcast for half an hour is not something to be sniffed at, and that's kind of it. And you sort of sit there and go, if you could have people listening to you for that long in an event or in a room, you'd be really happy with that. And I think thinking of it in that way, you're suddenly like, I don't need to have millions of listeners or whatever. It's like, actually, for my niche podcast, having 100 listeners who are engaged is great. And, I think it's there for you. And, I think the other thing is it's a good way for you to share your story in your own way. And I think there is this huge thing right now of, let's be honest, the media is dying a death. If you pick up any industry magazine now, they're so much thinner than they ever used to be. I remember when I was young. And but it's true. You pick up a magazine, you're like, what is this? And I think that's the thing, is like, actually that kind of publishing isn't really happening. It doesn't have as much impact anymore. And actually you can share your story, your expertise, and who you are and who your business is in your own way and in your own words. And I think that's a lovely part of podcasting. And I think there is also that thing of, in terms of growing a business, you can get guests on or things like that who you want to showcase or be associated with as well, and start to build relationships. And that's another area for growth for you and your business as well. So I think that's the kind of
absolutely. I mean, and it's not just, smaller businesses. I think bigger businesses as well, there's still an opportunity there, because you might want to focus that podcast on recruitment. And that's about, maybe there's stories about your company or organization, or maybe there's a really big topic like sustainability strategies, or particular, if you're in a major construction project, there might be elements of that would actually be really useful to share as audio, as a podcast, because it's an easier listen. Take more in, don't we?
Completely. But even on recruitment, you're like, if you're trying to get graduates on board, why not create podcasts about some of your graduates? A day in the life. This is what we do, how I got into it. And that's the kind of thing where you can create really interesting content, audio stories, lots of different stuff that I guess it's a different way of bringing your business to life and what you do. And I think that for me is where you can kind of
I've certainly found that as well, personally. I would never have sat and written 100 blogs, or 4 blogs a month. I just couldn't have done it. It just wasn't something that I could do. But speaking into a microphone, man, it's a really good way of getting all of that stuff out of your head and down, and onto, it can be onto paper. I'm sure we'll come onto that and ways to use the audio, but it's a really cathartic way to generate content as well.
It's therapy.
I like therapy.
Anybody there? She's just tapping. Okay. So in terms of podcasting, what is the best way to get started, in your opinion?
There are lots of practical things you can do. I think there are lots of technical things I could talk about, but actually, let's assume you're doing this for yourself and you want to keep the cost down. So my first tip would be, you need to record your voice and you need to listen to it. And the reason you need to do that is because it sounds very, very different the first time you do it.
It's awful, isn't it? It's the sound of, do I really sound like that?
Yeah, it sounds different. And the reason is because we're used to listening to our voice through our heads when we're talking, not back through a microphone. So it's very, very different. So I would definitely suggest you do something like practice. So if you've got a Mac, you could use GarageBand, you could use your iPhone, just record your voice and play it back. read out a Christmas carol, read out a poem. It doesn't have to be anything particularly interesting, but just to get into that process of recording and listening back to your voice. My biggest block for starting was that I sat in front of the microphone.
Really?
But once I started, that was it. Word vomit.
Just couldn't stop.
Exactly. So yeah, keeping it simple on recording. Use GarageBand on my Mac. I still use GarageBand on my Mac. I
used it the other day.
To use it.
Can I just say, I tried to edit an episode myself the other day, and I think it was 2.5 minutes. It took me 2 frigging hours on GarageBand. That's how awful I am at editing. Right?
That's really bad for GarageBand.
That's why I just send it to my editor.
To give you an idea, it would take me 10 to 12 minutes to record an episode. Depending if it's one of my episodes, it will take me less than 30 minutes to edit the episode.
Yeah, that's not me. It will take me way longer.
So, practice.
I record my intros on GarageBand, and that took me long enough because I'm rubbish at it. And then I just send them to my editor to put them together. I can't be doing that. But you know what? There's lots of different ways of doing it.
You do you. I mean, you can add the bells and whistles on later on. You can.
There were no bells and whistles. It was just trying to make it sound normal. What's going on? I don't like GarageBand.
It's you're an Android user, though, aren't you? This is a Mac thing. You don't like Macs.
Well, I've got a MacBook. I work on a MacBook Pro day in, day out. But GarageBand, I just don't like. I tried to script the other week as well.
What else could people use? Audacity? That's not free though, is it?
That's even worse. I found that, I don't know. I don't like editing software. That's what I've come up with.
Okay.
I'll just pay someone, Emma.
Well, you know what? I would like listeners to think that it is easy and you can do it.
If you're not me.
If you're not IO. But, have a play around. I found it simple. Once I knew which buttons to press, it's the same process. It's a process. It's over and over. That you're not doing anything any differently each time. Yeah. And I overlay my intro and outro. So all I'm doing is doing each episode. I did think about outsourcing it, but I outsource other parts of my podcasting process. We'll come on to that. But that bit I could do so quickly. It was one of those where there's
do you know what? And I think that's you've got a good point there. It's actually choosing the bits that you enjoy doing and you're good at. I am not good at editing, whereas you know what I mean. So it's like I have other skills.
You have great content to promote your podcast, so that's unsurprisingly that's
kind of what I focused on. So in terms of me and what I think about getting started, I just think listen to a lot of podcasts because that's how you learn what you like, what you don't like, what length works. You can listen. And I think listen quite intently into not just what they're saying, but how they're saying it, how things are structured and like what formats they're using, what's their intro, what's their outro. So actually you break it down. And I think that gives you, then you start to build on, this is a structure that this podcast follows. Do I like this? What elements do I like? And then you can start to think about how you'd build your own. And I think actually listening to podcasts is probably a really good way of doing that. And then you just got to get an understanding of what it is, what's out there. So for me, I think getting started, that is kind of one of the key things is actually go out and listen to some and just understand really how they're structured and how they work. And I think if you're going to get started as well, I think one of the things is, can you go out and I think doing that's probably my key one. Is go out and listen to some and kind of break them down. Yeah,
it's a really good point, actually, because I knew I didn't want to, I couldn't get through long episodes myself. So I deliberately didn't choose to do that format. And I wanted to create really, right from the start, really snackable, easy content that would be a back catalogue of sort of, you could binge it like a Netflix box set kind of situation. And actually I do get, from my downloads, I would say about half come from back catalogue. Every month.
I get that weird binging thing when you can see someone's definitely just gone through, and that's a long old time, and gone through loads of episodes.
Yeah, but they do. And that's great. That means you're producing something that people really like.
Yeah, it does. And I think the other, and like you said, if you like snackable ones, that's absolutely fine. There are some podcasts that are literally only 5 minutes long. They talk about one thing, that's it. You get your snack, off you go kind of thing. So there's lots of different formats, lots of different ways of doing it. And I think listen to a lot of podcasts, understand how they're structured. And then think about what you actually really like from that and what you'd like to do I think that's
And
probably my
also, I
best.
think that's thinking about what podcasts you like. I think it leads to sort of to talk about audience a bit, doesn't it? And I think a lot of those ones you talked about at the beginning, where people have started podcasts and stopped, I'll wager that they didn't really think about their audience. They didn't really think about why they were starting a podcast, and they didn't really have a goal for that podcast. So mine was very clear, and I wanted to grow a new audience that wanted to learn this type of content. And I also wanted to engage people and come into my world and onto my email list. It's a marketing tool as well, isn't it? So there were there's two ways I measure the success of the podcast, and I'm still doing it. So it's obviously working because I'm looking at those metrics and everything's working. But I think a lot of people that start and stop just don't think about what they're trying to get out of creating a podcast.
Yeah. I think there's a number of things, isn't it? What you're trying to get out of it, and also that part that we talked about earlier about what you enjoy and what works for you. Because also, if it's too much of a stretch, you are not going to want to do it, regardless of what the goals are. No. So I think it's a couple of bits you really need to think about is actually, and then also time. I guess time is actually in there as well. How much time do you realistically have to commit? And then it all kind of builds into that picture of how to get the most out of podcasting. But yeah, definitely, I think you're right.
Yeah, it all needs thinking about for sure.
And in terms of how do I know what topics to cover or what to do?
Well, I think it's sort of related to audience as well, isn't it? Well, it's the same. If we're taking this as a podcast to grow your business, to grow your audience, then it's thinking about that audience. As I said before, there's everything from knitting to swimming the channel, or how to become the next big business leader, poetry, all sorts, everything in between, and some of them have, I've noticed the most niche ones tend to have really, really good quality downloads. I move in podcasting circles, but I talk to a lot of podcasters, and actually, some of them have super, super, super niche topic, and I'm like, wow, but actually they have staggering stats. So
people know what to come to them for. It's like, I just want to know about this, and they drill down to it. Yeah,
and if you think about your business, that's what you're trying to do all the time. You want to be known for the XYZ. You want to be the person to go to for whatever it is, or the way you do something, or the way you attract staff, or the way you go about major projects, or whatever it happens to be. So be specific, I think, in summary. Also do some keyword research, because Apple in particular, you have to log keywords when you log your podcast, only the first time with them. Yeah. So think about, if the podcasts that you like listening to that you think are in your area, look at what keywords they come up for. There's a little bit of research if you want.
But there's also, you have to tag them, don't you? Under specific
that's categories. That's what I mean by the keywords.
Yeah. So I think the categories, you're absolutely right, because it's like, I was like, do I come into design or marketing? I think initially I started off as marketing. Then I looked actually again, and I was like, actually, some of the podcasts that's similar or a similar space to mine, they're in design. So I actually moved it across. But yeah, so you're absolutely right. So there's like two areas you can kind of look at, I think, for what we do. So it's really interesting, and you're right. It's getting the right categories and then thinking, what topics. But I think, it was interesting when you're talking about topics and stuff. It's like, actually, that's one of the reasons for this name change for my show. I was like, actually, I do built environment marketing. That's what I do as a business. And actually having my podcast with a similar name, it fits into all my other comms so much better and so much more closely. So you're right in terms of having an aligned strategy and how everything fits together in your marketing ecosystem. I think that's kind of what you need to do as well. So understanding that, what topics, and yes, my podcast is very, very niche, and I'm happy with that. But because that's helping the audience that I want to target. But it's also, I always make sure that the conversations are still open to other people outside the sector. It doesn't stop them from listening. Still very conversational, but I do built environment marketing, so it will always relate back to that.
It's a great name change.
Yeah, it does work really well, and that was literally, I came up with 10 titles on a train in June. I look back, it's like, oh yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you have to do exactly what it says on the tin, and that's what I went for with mine. Sometimes you can overthink these things.
And also I think as well, if you've got a second to capture someone's attention when they're flicking through hundreds of podcasts, make it as simple as possible. It's like any comms, isn't it? What's going to stop the scroll? And it's like, actually, I need that. that's me.
You'd have to be really, it's much harder to grow on names. It's much harder to grow a podcast that has an unusual name. So if you call yourself The In-Betweeners, but it's actually about HR, I don't know why I picked
No one's going to understand.
No one
Exactly. And people won't find it.
In-Betweeners, and they won't find you.
And people will suddenly go, what's the name of your podcast again? Haven't you got one? And it's like, actually, it's a lot easier now to find. So I think, definitely on the topics, don't be worried. Don't be too worried about being too niche.
And if you look at the more serious business, or let's talk about, the really, really famous shows, and even in marketing, the top 3, 5, they do, their names they do exactly what they say on the tin.
I think
they don't have that obscure name. So,
okay, so moving on. So, is the only option that you have to do a show yourself?
No. No. I know people that do, there's lots of formats. You can do whatever you like. There's no rules. You do you. So I would say, for me, it was always going to be a solo show. And I do, and I have guests on every so often. Your format is a guest show.
I might start doing some individual ones at some point, but
really,
I'm really rubbish at recording this. I find it easier to interview and talk like this. Recording them on my own, I'm like, I find that really hard, and I just stumble. Hence, 2 hours for 3 minutes.
But it's practice, isn't it? It's practice, and
it is.
Some people do say very little on their podcast. So I've been on one, and it was literally they didn't say anything really, which is very, again, a different style. Sometimes it's all about the co-host talking to each other. Which is another style, is this sort of banter type podcast. And there's so many.
But also, I think the thing about, you don't have to do your own show. Like your strategy could be, actually, I'm going to aim to go on 4 podcasts in my area of specialization over the next year. That could be your strategy.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a good way in, if before you set up on your own, is actually to find out if you like being on podcasts, and
that's
actually
true.
someone else does all the work. So I kind of think, actually, as a strategy, that's a good way in. And I actually would say to people, start there before doing your own, because then at least you're not sitting there trying to set up a podcast, buy the equipment, do all of that stuff, and then suddenly go, I don't like it.
I don't like it. Which is what those people did in 2020 when they just did 5 episodes and went, oh gosh, this is not for me.
Yeah, it's hard work, actually. Yeah. So I think that going on other people's, but making sure you kind of do it well. So you have listened to their show, you understand why, you'd be a good guest, doing all the good stuff, I think is going to be important.
Yeah, you get sort of inside track on how it works. I mean, I've been surprised when people have come on to the podcast and they've known very little about what's going on. And I've had to explain, you need to wear headphones, you need to make sure you're somewhere that's quiet.
Do you do full briefs? Because I always write a full.
I do, yeah. But I do a pre-chat, so I'm referring to the pre-chat. So I've been surprised at how little people know about, I'll come on your podcast. And then I talk to them, say, right, you can't swear. You can't, you can't, you can talk over each other. That's fine. But over the ear headphones really help with that, because you can really hear the other person and you can hear your own voice, and make sure you're in a quiet room, and, just little things like that, really. It's so you would get a lot of experience going on other podcasts first. I can see why that would be
the easiest way, I think. But also, it's your way of sharing your knowledge with their audience. Again, that whole thing of, community and partnering and building your visibility and business via other people's networks. It's a great way of doing it.
Yeah,
exactly. In terms of business growth. And are there kind of any tips you have on getting on other people's podcasts?
Well, this is still quite an undeveloped area, I think. There are not that many podcast directories, and most of them are paid for now, which is a shame. There's not really anyone doing that for free, which is a shame. There are a few, but you have to be in the right sort of groups to know where they are. And finding the right guests, I think, is tricky. So LinkedIn is great. You can find people on LinkedIn. So that's why it's important. Go back to saw Stacey's show yesterday, and she was on your podcast yesterday, Stacey Meadwell, and I was LinkedIn. Actually, it's really important that you are consistent across channels, because if someone's coming on, looking at your LinkedIn feed to see if you can talk about a topic, that's one of the places I'm looking.
Everything's got to be interconnected now. I think that's the thing. You're absolutely right.
Totally,
across all the channels.
And if you're going on podcasts, make sure you listen to them. I get approached by people because I'm in business and marketing, and they rattle on about
my God.
That's not my audience, though. That's not, you haven't listened to my podcast.
So like, would you like to have the best ever US Forbes rated blah 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 talking? And you're like, no, it's not really my audience. Yeah.
So I think, and guess, as we've just said, is about the prep time, having a really good brief, because not everyone knows what they're doing. Some people might be nervous, and it's just having that really clear. I think having some sort of formula you want to go through, even if you don't go through it, makes everyone feel more comfortable.
I don't think it's too dissimilar to because we obviously, in what we do, it's not dissimilar to having a brief for an event. What's your structure, your intake questions, this is the equipment you need to do to prepare. So having all of that ready. But also, I think if you're going to, like you said, in terms of listening to a few episodes, that's important. Also, how you approach people. It's like, do you need to offer them something? I always think you get your wish list of the podcast that you want to get on, understand what their podcast is trying to do. So, who are they targeting, what they talk about, and then kind of write a tailored pitch, which is, I listened to this show with Stacey. This is what Stacey said. I thought it was really good. This is, my connections and what I could bring to your show. Here are some ideas on what I could talk about. And you could do it in their style of titles. So, so it shows that you are, it's a tailored pitch, whereas a lot of the stuff that we get is pure spam.
Have you had a cold pitch that you've had on yet?
No,
me either.
Because I've had pure spam. All I've had is spam. So every guest I have, I approach. I've not had a cold pitch where I've gone, this is a really good pitch. I just haven't had one come through.
No, I haven't.
But I do understand them. I mean, it's like any cold pitch, right? I think you've got to, if someone did this and they sold it to me in the way that, listen to your show, really like this episode with such and such, because rather than just using that as a statement and not saying why, and then a couple of kind of, this is what I could bring to your show, then I would be a lot more open to it. But I've not had one come through.
No, it's tricky. And I think the other places to find shows is to look at podcast directories and look for keywords. And see if there are people already, because having people from other podcasts is a great way, as we've already said. So finding other shows, or just ideas for content or guests that might have been on other podcasts that were really good.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like I've got one out next week where it's the AEC Marketing Show, which is a US based one. She does exactly the same thing as me. And but that's great. So, she'll put links to my show and vice versa. And, so it's that whole reciprocal audience of people who are interested in our sector. So works very, very well. So next thing is, I guess you need to talk about how to get onto Apple and Spotify. How do you get your podcast onto there? How does it work?
Well, this is a bit of a technical question, isn't it? But basically, you do have to have a host for your podcast. So there's host platforms, and then in simplified terms, Buzzsprout or Anchor FM or Libsyn or others. So you can put them on any of those. You can choose one that suits your budget, suits how many shows you're releasing. There's an RSS feed that basically pushes your show out to these platforms, and you choose which platforms you want to have them on. Now, the first time you do Apple is a bit of a strange, weird, glitchy thing where Apple like you to pre-register your show. You have to apply to be on Apple, and they ask for more criteria. Stipulate the exact artwork size. You have to assess whether your show is going to be classed as explicit or not, and that it's explicit if one person swears. So this is why I'm quite strict on it, because they can re-rate your show as explicit if you have someone on that's swearing. So but you only do that once, and it's really straightforward. They don't make it too difficult, but you do have to wait a couple of weeks for them to recognise your show. But you only do that once. So then it's just basically using any kind of, it's the user interface on most of these hosting platforms are pretty simple.
Yeah, it's literally just a simple upload, add your text for your show, what's the title, and then you put your show notes in.
Integrated form, they have some sort of word widget in there that makes it really easy to paste text in and links and things like that. Yeah. That's it really. You just choose choose where yours goes. So mine goes up, pushed to my website every week. It gets pushed onto all the major platforms. I get my listens split between Spotify is a very, very close second to Apple at the moment. In fact, it nudges above it quite often now, which is interesting.
But yeah, I guess it just depends, doesn't it, where people are listening from and all of that kind of stuff. But you're absolutely right. The whole thing about you've got your host where you upload your episode to, and they host that piece of content, and then it's pushed out to the various directories, which are Apple and Spotify, and whenever you hit publish. And it's quite an easy system to do once you've set it up. Yeah, it's just set up at the start with the application bit. But that's all kind of done for your host anyway.
I suppose the only thing I would say about host is just, I don't know if this is still the case, but certainly when I started my podcast, there were places like Anchor FM, which are free and great and easy to use, but you need to just watch that you do own your content that you're putting up there, which is why I ended up going for a paid for service with Libsyn. So quite a few people, came a cropper where they actually can do whatever they like with the content because it isn't actually yours.
And that's exactly what, owning your own content, I think it's important, and I'm happy to pay. And it's a small amount. I think I pay like £8-9 a month for Buzzsprout. It's not
something
huge.
Like that.
So it's not huge. And I think as well, when you're looking at, just think about what you want from your podcast episodes, which host you use really, but there are some good entry level ones you can use, and they're really easy to use.
Totally. Yeah. People like recommendations though, don't they? We use different ones, I think, don't we? So
you use Libsyn, don't you?
Yeah.
I'm a Buzzsprout. But I might look for one that does video. Maybe I might switch.
Libsyn does video.
Ooh, maybe. So there you go. I might have a look.
They're on the beta version of Libsyn 5 at the moment, which I think is supposed to be slightly better as well. But
okay, it's something it's in the back of my head, but I don't need to do really. So, what is the best way to measure ROI or return on investment, as it's known, in your opinion?
This made me think this question actually, because I know from my own perspective what I'm doing, and I know what my goal is, but actually it really made me think about how to help people listening today with things. And there's a few things I came across recently, and one was that I think reviews used to be a really sort of heralded as this sort of way of getting a really good show and having lots of reviews. And it is important to have reviews for Apple and for social proof. When you're sharing posts on social media and you want people to listen, it's always it's like recommendations, isn't it?
Yeah.
Always good. But I'd be really clear about why you're using that metric. There's no evidence now that supports that in any way Apple will prioritize your podcast if it has more reviews, or it will in any way relate to downloads. So that's something to think about. And increasing I think increasing your reach and increasing your downloads is a good one, but not in that, I want X amount of downloads. It's about that incremental growth. So having a goal and looking at ways you can achieve that goal. So whether that's an extra 100 a month, or whether you want to be doubling the size in 6 months, and work towards that, because there are most of, and you know this, Io, but most of the work in getting downloads is in the marketing of the podcast
and sharing it again and sharing it in a slightly different way with a different angle. But and you're absolutely right. And I kind of put down, you've got the normal, like the listeners, the followers, people following you. You've also got, the thing I find is that you can't sit there and go, well, someone from this company listened to an episode. You can't go that granular. But what you can do, you can, for example, in Google Analytics, you can set up UTM links. So like you can add those and use those to track how many people are converting from LinkedIn or how many people are converting from different social media. So that's another way.
Very few from LinkedIn.
It's but then I think most of mine is actually from LinkedIn. So I think that's it. It's kind of who your audience are and who you're connected to as well. It's really, I think that's the one bit where it's like, it's really hard. But I think a lot of it is also anecdotal. So if I'm out and about and someone says I listen, then that's the metric that I kind of think, And
there are other things as well, like the Apple podcast charts. It's a good stat. I go in and out of the charts. I've been in the top one. I'm semi-regularly in the top 100 for marketing in the UK, but in lots of charts, I was, big in South Africa for a long time.
Singapore or something like that. And you're like, this is amazing.
The US is my second biggest market, unsurprisingly. But Africa and South Africa, I'm pretty huge.
There you go. When you're walking down Cape Town one day, you should be like, Emma, is that you? I know that voice.
But it varies. But it's about understanding where you want to be, and this comes back to setting goals and things like that.
Yeah.
Is making sure you understand what if that's important to you, then set that as your benchmark. But it's growing the downloads is not. It doesn't actually happen organically. Is what that was my big.
No, you have to do a lot of work to grow it, and I think that's it. You look at it as constantly, keep talking about your podcast, keep sharing it so that people. Yeah. I mean, still now people go, I didn't know you had a podcast. It's like, really?
And I can see that in my stats. When I first started, it was like this. And I didn't really have the right things in place. The links we've talked about, making sure that everything's got a link. And conversions are really big. And then I started to do more, and my conversions just started to do this.
And you see it, and it's like, actually, that's what you need.
Yeah.
Before we close out, and we do have a question from Michael Fisher, who I know does a podcast called Constructive Voices, I think it's called. Oh. So he's asked us the question, what platform do you use for guest podcast episodes? Which ones do you use, Emma?
I just use Zoom, but I don't use video.
How do you find that? I've used it before. How do you find it?
Audio. If you put your video on, the audio quality nosedives.
Really?
Yeah, massively. That's what. So I ask people to turn the video off, and they go, "Oh, really?" Yep.
I was going to say, then my recommendation will work for you. The one I tend to use is called Zencaster, which is actually a dedicated audio recording thing. But you do have video. The free version, you do have video, but it doesn't record it. But it means you can see each other, and it still records it, and it's way better than Zoom. And your audio quality is high quality audio. So that's the one that I use. For this, obviously, I'm using StreamYard because we're doing these live streamed into LinkedIn. And actually, I've upgraded my premium so that I can download individual audio tracks. And actually, the audio from this is very, very good as well. So those are two that you could use, StreamYard. But Zencaster is actually free. And that's the one I mainly use.
Actually, but only once. So.
But yeah, the free one is absolutely great, and you get high quality audio, and you can see people and not record. So I think that's fine, because at least it's easier to interview. I used to do interviews and not see people, and it's just harder. It's just, you don't have that rapport, and it's hard to not jump in and stuff like that. So that's what I use. I hope that helps, Michael. And now, leadership in construction. Ever tried Riverside? He's got. I haven't. I've tried it. I didn't like it that much. Did you like it?
Riverside, I've never used it, but I much like Anchor, I don't think you own your own content. And you need to check that out first. But I've not heard brilliant things about it, but I haven't personally used it myself, so I can't.
Actually, I recorded a podcast on someone else's podcast the other week on Riverside. It took absolutely ages to upload the track to the actual application, literally like half an hour. When normally on Zencaster, it's more or less instantaneous. So I was a bit like, this is a long time to upload the audio. So I didn't love it that much. So yes. So I use Zencaster, not Riverside. Okay, so tools, resources and tips. So quick fire round, top tools and resources to follow if you want to get into podcasting.
I really enjoyed collating these from my old episodes. So a Podfollow is free, and it allows you to create a show link before you've released an episode, which means you can create all your socials and schedule your content to coincide with when your show goes live. So you'd have to show live, go back in, get the link, and then put it into your social media. That's really good. Okay. My next one is SpeakPipe, which is free. So if you want to continue the sort of audio theme with people engaging with you and getting in touch, it's a free voicemail platform. You can create your SpeakPipe page, and people can leave you audio content, and I've had some really interesting responses on there.
I was going to say, Memo FM is another one that does exactly the same thing, where you can record. Yeah, that's another one I've used.
Yeah, I like it. In terms of marketing, Canva Quick Create is a really simple way to create multiple posts about your podcast artwork. So it creates all the different ones you might need for your different platforms, but with one piece of artwork. You probably need Pro for that, but it's not very expensive, about $10 a month. And you can upload your brand guidelines, so it does it all for you, which saves you going in again and creating individual posts each time. Otter.ai is free for transcriptions. I use the paid version, but I release 4 episodes a month, so it works out fine for me. Really, really
it's
good.
100 quid a year, isn't it?
Yeah, really good quality transcription. You just upload your audio file and it's ready really quickly. I have also used rev.com. That's paid for. I've switched to just using Otter. There wasn't really much value in me using a paid for one, paying as much as Rev costs for theirs. Although they do good subtitles if you're using video. Wave is good for audiograms.
Yeah, that's what I use. I love it.
Upload your audio clip. I also use Headliner, mostly because it's free with Libsyn. So I don't have to do any uploading and downloading it. Just, do you want to create a headliner from this show? Free hosting platforms, I think we've covered. But yeah, check the T's and C's. And my last one is Audio Jungle, which is really good, free intro and outro, royalty-free music, or for special effects, which I sometimes have shooses in my show. Yeah.
Obviously, mine doesn't if I edit it on my own, that's for sure. More complexity. I had a couple. So I think the podcasting for business podcast that Lindsay Ann does is very good. Gives you a lot of really practical stuff.
Very good.
And also she produces and run courses. And also there's someone called Christine, I think it's Menza, and she does a lot on social media and she talks a lot about talking about podcasts. And she also has a book, which is So You Want to Start a Podcast, which is one of the things that I kind of read when I was setting up in July 2020.
Yeah. Lindsay helped me with my podcast.
Yeah, so those are kind of my hints and tips. And that's kind of it. And thank you for coming on the show, Emma. And how can people find out about you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. My podcast is on all the major streaming platforms. You can search for Emma Drake or Communication Strategy That Works. Or you can go to my consulting website, which is hemby.co.uk.
Fantastic. And everything will be in the show notes as per normal. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Built Environment Marketing Show. Don't forget to check out the show notes, which will have useful links and resources connected to this episode. You can find that on abasmarketing.com. And of course, if you like the show, please do share it with others on social, as it helps more people to find us. See you soon.